Today I'm going to give you 3 more stories of people who experienced dying and then didn't die. They jumped back in time to a moment before that experience, dying, happened. They got their second chance. So let's start with the first video now. I decided to share my story here since I don't have any explanation for it almost 3 years later. Rewinding back to September 2015, I was a freshman who had just entered high school 2 weeks prior. Already school was weighing down on me and I'd been continuing a habit I had of going on walks to clear my mind. On this day, I'd been walking around a pond near my house. There's a trail that goes around the pond, and then the trail leads up to a set of abandoned train tracks on the other side, which sit about 15 feet above the path and pond below. After walking the circle, I was crossing the train tracks when I decided I wanted some ice cream. The fastest way to get to the ice cream shop was to take the path below the train tracks, but there isn't any way to cross the pond without going all the way back around, and being 14 years old, I decided that I could just jump from the tracks onto the path below and keep walking. Looking down from above, it didn't seem to be that far of a jump, so that is what I did. The next thing I remember after that was being half conscious in an ambulance. Everything was extremely blurry and the paramedics sounded slightly panicked. I wasn't able to move either of my legs, so I think they were both broken. The scene continued on for a few minutes until we arrived at the hospital and I was wheeled into the emergency room on a stretcher. I only had a few minutes in the emerge before I eventually lost all consciousness, and that was the last thing I saw. After I'd been unconscious for what felt like about an hour, I opened my eyes and I was on the ground. I just hit the ground after jumping, but this time I was fully conscious. I hadn't noticed this before I jumped, but there had been a car parked watching me. I think they thought I was attempting suicide, but it probably just looked that way, and the people in it had jumped out and called an ambulance for me. The ambulance ride had been the exact same as it was the first time, and I was put into the same emergency room that I had died in before. The only difference between the two events were that I was fully conscious this time and my injuries were much more minor. I was discharged from the hospital the same night with only stitches in my lip, a slightly fractured jaw and a mild concussion. For a while after this, I assumed that the first scenario had just been a weirdly coincidental dream that I'd had while I was unconscious, so I didn't consider it anything abnormal. It wasn't until a few weeks after when my mom told me that the people who had helped me said I had been conscious the entire time. I hadn't been knocked out after hitting the ground or anything. So that entire scenario managed to happen in the few seconds it took for me to hit the ground while I was still conscious. If you have been following my death series where I release a new video on this topic every Friday, then maybe you saw my other videos where I gave you examples like this from people who died and then all of a sudden didn't die. In some of those examples, and you can of course go back and watch the other videos, in some of those videos, people jump back time to right before that incident happened. In this case, the boy did jump off that bridge or whatever it was, and in one scenario got hurt very severely and died, and in the other scenario he only got, well, I wouldn't want to say minor injuries if his jaw was half broken, but definitely way less minor than actually dying. So I'm wondering if there would have been another scenario where he didn't jump at all. Probably. I think all different scenarios that we can imagine happen in each different timeline. But in most of the stories we've heard so far, that incident, that jump would not have happened at all, but it does seem to be a little bit different. We did have the story in a previous video where that man died falling down the stairs while carrying furniture, and then jumped back in time to before he was asked to carry furniture, and then he said immediately, I'm not going to carry that specific thing. That means that he got a choice. In that story there was no choice. The boy did not go back in time to before he took that jump, but still the outcome was different. In other stories we already had, a car crash happened, and then that person jumped back in time to right before that crash happened, and then that car that hit them in the first experience just passed them. And in that case, of course, those people also didn't get a conscious choice, but it seems like sometimes we get a conscious choice to then act differently. And in some ways, when we die and then jump to another timeline, there is just something that is still happening to us, it is already unfolding, just unfolding in a different way. Anyway, we do have 2 more stories in this video. Watch the next one. I died and merged with myself from another universe. I got COVID and it caused me thyroiditis, myocarditis, and pericarditis, which all together hit me pretty hard. One night I feel an extremely painful pain in my chest. Nothing I had ever felt before, but I knew that it was heart related as I had gotten used to the myo and peri pain. I tried to go out of my flat and advise my parents who live in another flat, but I collapsed due to the pain and shortness of breath. I knew I was dying and I was terrified. Suddenly I woke up and it seemed like a dream. Also, my heart diagnosis changed drastically in the next MRI. I still believe I died that night and jumped and merged with another me from another universe where my heart was not so damaged. In this story, we have someone collapsing in the hallway due to heart failure, and then all of a sudden waking up in their bed, and those heart problems are gone, or at least significantly better. I believe that he may be right about jumping to a timeline where that heart stuff did not happen or was not as severe, because in that other timeline maybe he didn't get COVID at all, or it was way less severe, or maybe it was severe but it didn't damage his body as much. I do have a video about instant healing. You will find it in my Manifesting 101 playlist, where I answer different questions when it comes to manifesting. And I do believe that we can shift energies and then automatically diseases can disappear. And in that video, I give you scientific proof, because I talk about multiple personality disorder. I know it does have a new name now. And people who have this disorder have different alter egos all living in one body. If our diseases were all strictly physical, related to the body, then all alter egos should share this disease, right? For example, diabetes, asthma, heart-related diseases. However, when another alter takes over, some diseases completely vanish within a short period of time. And there is scientific proof, because doctors will give medication to one alter ego but not to others because they don't need it. So even those diseases where doctors say, no, you're going to have that for the rest of your life, it is not true, because then alter egos, all of them inhabiting the same body, will share the same diseases. And I think that as soon as something within ourselves changes, we jump to another timeline, or in this case, when we die, we jump to another timeline where we don't have the same issues. And we don't have to die in order to get to the other timeline, because we can consciously manifest it. So I think that that man is right with his assumption that he did jump to another timeline or merge with himself from another universe. What do you guys think? Leave your comments. But now let's watch the last video for today. I died in a car accident but woke up in my driveway. I was driving home from work one day and a car crossed the middle lines and smashed right into me head on. This was a rural highway, both of us going about 60 or 65 miles per hour. I saw it. I felt it. I heard it. It was so real. As they hit me, I felt my body get slammed and mangled. I saw everything go black. I felt myself die. And then I opened my eyes and I was several miles away on the other side of town, pulling into my driveway. My kids were in the yard playing. My partner was inside doing housework. I was completely intact and none of that had happened. I began crying, deep belly crying, and I begged my partner to tell me if I was really alive. I know it sounds insane, but I'm a sober and educated person with no history of mental illness. I've never experienced anything like that before or since. It was so vividly real. I feel as though I jumped timelines or something. It's been a couple of years ago now, and it still feels just as real and just as confusing. This story is similar to the last one we just heard, because the guy who just collapsed in the hallway all of a sudden woke up in his bed, and this lady all of a sudden drove into a driveway. Those stories we've had in the last video where I gave you 3 stories, or also the stories that I gave you within some of the other videos, they usually had that jumping back in time, sometimes a couple of seconds, sometimes even several minutes or a bit longer. But all of these 3 stories are different. In the first story, that boy jumped down onto the railway tracks. First he got severely injured, and then all of a sudden he still jumped, but it was less severe. In the second story, that man collapsed and woke up in his bed, and now in the third story, that woman died in a car crash and all of a sudden pulled into a driveway. This means we don't have the typical jumping back in time, but in the second and the third story, there seems to be some time gap, a jump forward in time, but still in another timeline. But a part, some minutes or maybe even longer, seem to be missing in that case. This shows us that when we die, it can happen in several ways. Sometimes we do get a choice and then take another path. Sometimes we don't have that choice and just jump back automatically. Sometimes we do jump back. In the first story of this video, yes, the boy jumped back from when he died, but not to before he jumped, but after he jumped. So we do have the jumping back in time and then replaying the same thing over again, but differently. He said it was the same ambulance, the same emergency room, but instead of dying this time, it was less severe. But now we also have the possibility of dying and then jumping ahead onto another timeline, ahead in time and onto another timeline simultaneously. I just believe it is fascinating that there are so many different possibilities. No story really is the same. However, the pattern is the same, dying and then not dying. And as I said before in other videos, this to me means we do have to rethink reincarnation, because I believe that we live through every possible outcome that the universe has written for us, already created for us. And when we die in one timeline, we just relive the same life again. And sometimes we just take another turn. And sometimes we go back maybe even years, as Neville Goddard said, going back to the age of 20. But I believe when we consciously manifest, that is also one experience that already has been created for us. So maybe when we jump timelines, we don't really jump timelines. Maybe we stay on that timeline that just seems like we make experiences of jumping into another reality, but it is that particular life, and it has always been written that way. And for those people who experience dying, maybe it was a glitch, but if time is an illusion, well, it can't be a glitch. Then that must already have been meant to happen to them. But as usually, I'm very much looking forward to your comments. If you haven't done it yet, please check out the entire Death series playlist. And of course, you're welcome to check out my other playlists and also my affirmations and subliminal tracks that will help you to reprogram your subconscious mind to make the best experience you can and get the best out of this life you're living right now. I do see you there on personal coaching. I hopefully see you in my comments. Until then, I wish you all the best now. Bye-bye.